Dr. Gausman, thanks for meeting with us today to talk about what has been quite an unprecedented year. It was March of 2020, when March 15th to be exact, when Governor Reynolds announced schools would be closing for at least 4 weeks. It wasn't until 6 days later that Sioux City had, or Woodbury County I should say, reported their first positive case. At that time, did you think that schools would reopen?
I didn't necessarily think they'd reopen for that year. We knew that we would eventually close. We actually were most surprised at how early we ended up receiving the announcement from the governor that we were going to close. I think we learned about that on a Sunday, and it was, to apply to the very next day. And so, of course, we were hopeful back in those days that we could find ways to mitigate the challenges of the virus and get kids back in school. But we immediately began working on ways in which we could deliver instruction, food, services to kids and families in the challenges of the pandemic, because we of course, no one knew back then what it was going to be like. We just knew that it was severe.
And in those first few weeks of the pandemic, what was your main concern?
Yeah, it's interesting when you think about the fact that our core mission is academic achievement. And so we're here to bring the students forward academically. However, when the pandemic first occurred, we really learned one of our areas of core mission wasn't just academic achievement, but food service. And we immediately began a process where we would get food delivered in a safe way to families, most specifically to kids, any students that are 0 to 18 years of age, in what I believe ended up being 27 different locations about our town. Kind of a second area of focus for us was pushing connectivity out into neighborhoods, because of course academic achievement is our core mission, and so we wanted to do all that we could to reach students as well as we could. We didn't have enough devices back in that day for all students to have their own device, and even if we had, not all students had connectivity in their homes. So we first started pushing vehicles into neighborhoods that were wireless hotspots and allowed people to connect to the internet. And then we did more to provide more devices for students. That was the academic side. On the other side, which was food service, we just kept this program rolling where it was literally free food available to families in partnership with the Siouxland Food Bank, and then of course our program that was for students alone. And it worked very well. I'm very proud of the team that put that program together.
Great. Well, you answered my next question about the hot spots, but what do you think was the biggest obstacle in getting all students prepared for virtual learning?
Yeah, for a number of years we said we're not sure that this virtual thing will really work for us in the long run, especially in a community such as ours. We're a very diverse community, we're large, we're kind of a medium-sized school district by nation standards, but for Iowa we're fairly large. We're the third largest district in the state. And we didn't have the number of devices and the supports and the resources, but because of our staff members and the great work of all kinds of our staff members, not just teaching staff, they were incredible, but our bus drivers, our food service, our counselors, our nurses, our administrators, we were able to work together. Sioux City has always had a way of overcoming enormous challenges, whether that's a flood, whether that is an airplane disaster, whether, those sorts of things. And I think they really showed their true colors during the pandemic as well, as our team came together and found ways to serve kids, even amidst these challenges that none of us had ever experienced before.
So talking about, I know there was the shortage in devices and Wi-Fi, so what happened with those kids that couldn't connect and attend class? Because I know at the time it wasn't really mandatory for them to be logging in. So how did that all pan out?
Yeah, that's correct. So for students that didn't have devices, we wanted them to have the exact same experience, or to the best of our ability, the same experience. And so as a partner to our food service program that we had at many of our buildings and other spots throughout our community, we were also doling out homework packets and instructional packets, hard copies, if you will, of materials for students. And as we look back on those times, it certainly wasn't the best service we'd ever provided to students, but it was the best we could do at that moment in that pandemic. And I was really proud of our students and the families for participating in that. We felt that we had better than 30% of our students engaging in that program, eventually growing to a much bigger number than that. And of course, we learned later that we would never finish that school year. We would never have a time where mandatory instruction would be allowed for the rest of that school year. And so we tried to provide as many options and opportunities available for our students as we could, so that we could get to the summer and use that time during what we normally would think of as the summer break to design instruction activities for virtual learning, for safer in-person learning if we could continue to do so during the pandemic, which we have. It was a whole lot of juggling by a lot of people. I don't know that I've ever watched our team work so exhaustively, but at the same time, they came together and they found ways to get it done for kids.
What would you say was the percentage of students as a whole that were engaged in virtual learning?
Yeah, so as we finished the last school year, it was probably about 20% of our students that were either voluntarily, doing some virtual learning, 30 to 40% of our students when you add to that the packets of information, instruction that we were handing out. When we started this school year, so that would have been at about August of 2020, we knew that of course education had become mandatory again. Students needed to attend one way or the other, but we knew that our community needed choices. And not everybody was of the perspective that they wanted their children in school. We had some medical challenges for some students and families where they wanted to be able to learn from their home. So at that time when we started this school year, we had about 30% of our students learning virtually. The rest of them, the other 70%, were learning in person. And when I say in person, we started both the school year and the new calendar year of 2021. Each of those two time slots, we dedicated 2 weeks to what we call hybrid instruction, where for a 2-week period only, we would do about half time in school, half time at home, and try to make it work that way. That also allowed us to have only half the students in the buildings at a time, which allowed for more social distancing. And then, of course, we acknowledged that about 30% of our students were learning virtually entirely, and so that really allowed us to manage that. After that 2-week period was done at the beginning of the school year and at the beginning of the calendar year, we brought all students back. We were one of only, if not the only, larger district in the state of Iowa that really has been in school since school year started. I'm proud of that, not in the sense that we didn't acknowledge the pandemic and the challenges, but I believe kids need to be in school. And our team, our board seems to believe as well that our kids need to be in school. And so we did all that we could to put protocol in place to do it as safely as we possibly could.
Let's talk a little bit about what you just mentioned. So
Sure.
There's schools in the other side of the state, like Des Moines, that kids haven't been in school at all. I don't know what your relationship is with other superintendents across Iowa, but did you guys ever come together and kind of share ideas? And you talked about your successes here now that
Sure.
we've had a successful start.
We work really closely with the other, what we refer to as urban school districts in Iowa. Some people don't consider Iowa having much urban at all, but really there's a group of about 20 school districts in this state that have multiple high schools in each district. Have greater levels of student diversity, whether that's poverty, racial, ethnic diversity, those sorts of things, students who are learning the English language. And this group of 20 districts that makes up the Urban Education Network actually represents a little over 40% of the students in the state. It's a small group. There's 320 some districts in this state, but 20 of the districts represent nearly 40% of the students, and we worked together regularly. We had certainly weekly digital conference calls that we would engage in, sometimes more than once a week. And certainly we learned that every community had their own perspective, every community had their own challenges, had their own celebrations, had their own ways in which they might have more resources in this area or in that area. And it became very evident that while we're all similar in a lot of ways, we were all going to need to make our own decision for our own community. And I'm proud of Sioux City. I'm proud that we decided for us to begin. I'm certainly not critical of some other district that for their own reasons or resources chose to do a different model. I'm proud of our team for choosing the model we did and pushing things forward. That hasn't been without challenge. We had a couple of weeks during the beginning of the year where we really would have to juggle staffing a bit because it wasn't so much the really high levels of students who were out on quarantine or having challenge, but we wanted to do all we could to keep our staff members safe. And so sometimes that came with a little bit of challenge that maybe some other districts didn't experience, but our team found ways to make it through.
Since we just kind of touched on a little bit about COVID cases in the district among students and staff, overall from August to now, how do you feel the number of cases have impacted the district as a whole?
Yeah, we've been very transparent with the community by releasing the data each week, at the end of each week on Fridays, something that we decided, our communications department decided we were going to do right at the beginning because we knew that a lot of people were going to want to know, how many students are being impacted this way or that, or how many staff members are being impacted. And of course, we know also in Iowa, they did a nice job of putting together the statewide websites where you could look at the community positivity rates and those sorts of things. And we mirrored those pretty regularly in the sense of the shape of our trend lines. However, our trend lines were much lower by percentage than the county was. And I think that's because we put more protocol in place. We had incredible cleaning protocol and of course mandated the masks, which didn't go over well with everybody when we first did it. I think we've become more accustomed to it now. And everywhere possible, and it wasn't possible everywhere, but everywhere we could, we put in more social distancing. And so, yeah, we had a week or two where we had, certainly higher percentages than we would have liked, but we consistently stayed lower in terms of students or staff who were in the district, in their building, and showed signs of the virus on any given week. Our numbers stayed really quite low, and I think that's a credit to them.
So you guys have been on a pretty good stretch with
That's
really
correct.
Extremely low cases,
That's correct.
Zero for a few weeks.
We've been zero for some time now. Now, that's not to say that we don't have students or staff members out there who don't have the virus. I want to be clear about that. We just don't have students or staff members that we know of who have been in the buildings and have had a positive test or result of the virus. And so, again, I'm just proud of our team.
Yeah, looking at the data that the district has provided, cases average, 20s and 30s throughout the time. And I did notice that the number of quarantine students sometimes reached over 500. Was that a challenge for teachers? How did those students receive instruction? Was it from their same teacher, or did you have dedicated virtual teachers for those pods of students?
Yeah, that was a real challenge for us because you have to understand that if a child and their family made the decision to go virtual, they were assigned a different teacher or group of teachers, depending on their grade level. And they were learning with them separate from this, and they were never going to be subject to the challenges of the virus from school. So they were able to just regularly attend and so on. Meanwhile, you have students in the regular in-person classrooms who might occasionally have to be quarantined, but they can't really jump into where that other classroom is going because two different classrooms are doing two different sets of things. Our instructional pacing, our standards for the district are all very consistent, and that helps. But we can't have a teacher who's teaching a virtual classroom, let's say of third graders, and there's 25 of them or 30 of them or whatever, and you've got kids coming in and out of there all the time because they're in or out of quarantine. And so we really couldn't use our built virtual system for that. So we treated kids who went into quarantine more like a student that had a longer illness. Like if a student, on a given year has their wisdom teeth out, or if they unfortunately get mono, or something like that, and they're out for a longer period of time, where the families can pick up their homework, pick up some instruction packets, and try to continue to move forward. But we couldn't have them bouncing in and out of the already developed virtual system, and so there were a couple of weeks in there where we had so many that were out on quarantine. And I even talked with some families who would have a student out on quarantine. They'd come back and be there a few days and then have to quarantine again because they never had a positive test necessarily. but they were exposed. And it was just one of those challenges that we had to work our way through. Just like we always think about classrooms that have a teacher who is absent for illness, and you put a substitute teacher in. Well, we had to develop a whole system about virtual substitute teachers as well. And all kinds of things we've never thought of before that maybe they don't teach you in superintendent school, but we had to create systems that work well for this program.
Did you ever run into an issue where you didn't have enough teachers or enough substitutes? And if so, how were students divided?
That's right, and so we're really looking at when you look at those who work most closely with students, you're looking certainly at the teacher, you're looking at the instructional assistants or paraprofessionals, we sometimes call them, certainly the building level administrators and counselors and nurses and those sorts of things. And yes, during the run of the pandemic, we had times where a staff member had to be quarantined or gone, maybe they had the illness, and we just didn't maybe have as many subs as we'd like to have that were willing to come in, and so we'd have to divide some students and put them in different classrooms, which is why I'm thankful that our classrooms are so well paced and our standards are so clear and consistently delivered by our staff, because that would allow them to work through that process. But it was cumbersome. And I'm thankful to our families who gave us the grace and patience that we needed to work through that. I think those days, hopefully, are behind us now. Certainly we hope that the metrics continue to improve and that things will get better, not worse. But we're prepared should we need to, take a little more action, because we're seeing those numbers creep up again.
Were there any major outbreaks at certain schools? I know that some buildings, certain classrooms, had to go virtual, but right. Did it ever come close to a time where maybe the entire
I'm trying to remember. I do recall one building that we closed, and I don't remember for how many days, but that we had to really shut that building down and go entirely virtual with that building. And so that strikes me. Mandy, I'm looking at you to see if that was only one. Yeah, okay, I apologize. I do remember this time where we had one building that went down. We had another building that I recall we were watching very closely, not because of students, but because staff members. It just appeared that a number of staff members were getting sick, and we were either going to have to push more substitutes into that building or maybe go virtual with that building if we had enough staff members who were in needs of being apart from one another but not sick. And so, but eventually that building recovered a bit, and so it was just something where on a nearly daily basis, it was at that time it was daily. We're watching each and every building and their percentages of students and staff members who are there and not there to work through it, and we just found ways to make it work.
Great. So in the initial drafts of the Return to Learn plan, masks were not required, they were expected. I know this was a really hot topic before school started. So what I want to know is, why wasn't the decision made right off the top to require masks? Did it kind of have to do with the influence of Governor Reynolds, or not instituting a statewide mask mandate, or what was the thought process at that time?
Yeah, there are so many decision makers that were involved in the pieces of that puzzle, but no one was stepping forward and saying, this is the final decision. I know it was my opinion that the only way we were going to be able to open the buildings and consistently serve students is if we consistently have the same rules and regulations for everybody. The only way that seemed clear to me was with masks on. But I know even the school board, for whom I work, had different perspectives back in those days. Some were a little more toward the masks, some were a little less toward them. Ultimately, I knew that the school board was going to have to make this decision, and I would implement the decision that they made. And I knew what my own opinion was. It probably would have been easier in some ways if the governor or the Department of Ed or some other governing body would say, everybody's going to do it exactly the same way, and here's how that is. But I understand their decision to leave those decisions up to the local entities. And frankly, I appreciate that. Often we're heard saying, we wish that the legislature, the governor, would let us make some decisions on a more local level. And here, then, sometimes they give us that authority and we complain about that. And so it was important to me to acknowledge that they were really leaving this decision to us for what's best for Sioux City, what's best for the kids in the Sioux City Public Schools as it relates to our school board. And you're right, there was a lot of battle back and forth at that time about whether students would wear a mask or not. I remember parents who would visit with me and say, I don't care what you say, my child's not going to wear a mask. And so we just had to be very clear with them to say, we have an option for you. It's virtual learning. If you don't want your child to wear a mask, we don't want to make them, but the option that's available to you is the virtual teaching model. And so over time, that just became a little more consistent, and I think it's worked out really quite well.
So you supported masks being required from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When school started, did any administrators run into issues with students not complying and wearing their masks?
Yeah, as we got started, you always have people who, you bring in a new set of rules and they test those rules a little bit. We had extraordinary expense just purchasing masks for everyone because, of course, if somebody showed up without a mask, we didn't want to just send them home. We wanted to provide them with one so that they could continue their learning experience. Now, if they didn't show up with their own mask, 10 days in a row, that's a different story. And so we had some challenges, but they were handled at each site and with each individual. And again, I think the families did a great job. I know our administrators did a great job of working through the understanding of, if you're going to be in the buildings, these are the protocol we're going to use.
Is the district keeping track of the percentage of teachers that have been vaccinated?
Yes, in that we wanted to know in our partnership with Siouxland District Health, and I should say Siouxland District Health has been amazing all the way through this, of educating us, helping us move forward, getting our staff vaccinated. We had some people that early on wondered why some of the districts around the area had vaccination clinics right in their school building for their staff, and yet our staff participated at the Tyson, and the reason is size and scale. And we have 2,500 staff members. We're the largest employer in Sioux City, and we can't just do that in our partnership with Siouxland District Health without their ability to make it efficient. And to anyone who's been to those vaccination sites at Tyson, it's been incredible what Siouxland District Health has done. But we began by surveying our staff members just to find out who would, we weren't going to require the vaccine be taken by staff members, but we wanted to know how many wanted to receive it. And in the different surveys that we've had go out, it's always been greater than 80% of our staff, more close to 90% of our staff who would like and have begun to receive the vaccine. Certainly as we're into March now, we know that our staff members have had opportunities. And while we're not mandating the vaccine, we do know that as we get close to the end of this school year, all will have had the opportunity to be vaccinated.
To recover some of the time lost last year, has the district considered expanding summer school to recover?
Yes, we have. We not only have considered it, we're implementing programs for, we've done a number of studies over the last few years separate from the pandemic, where we've learned that a lot of remedial programs, programs that help students catch up, often work better actually during the school year, where students can stay a little longer, maybe have a Saturday opportunity for some tutoring, those sorts of things. And so we've greatly expanded that, particularly in our secondary schools, our middle schools and our high schools. And because we had the blessing, and I'll call it the blessing, of the first 2 rounds of funding from the federal government, the ESSERS funding, Elementary and Secondary Schools Education Relief Act, that we're able to do more with that to try and make up from the lost time. And so yes, we will have summer school at all of our facilities this summer and encourage those to participate as we begin rolling out the communication about that program.
So will it be a normal length summer school, or will it be extended, or?
Yeah, I don't have all the details for every grade level right now. Very commonly when we do the summer school programs, it's a 4 to 6 week session depending on what grade level you're at and what your needs are. Often the school days maybe aren't quite as long as a regular school day because they're more intently focused in specific content areas. And so I expect it to feel like that. The reason I'm not able to give you a whole lot of detail right now is we're working out the transportation and food service options that go with that, because we want people to be able to get there, and we need to take care of them nutritionally as well as academically. And so while I'm confident we're going to do all of these things, we just don't have them all built quite yet.
So last year, a lot of end of school year activities were canceled, including prom.
Sure.
Is there plans to have prom this year?
Yeah, we're, you know, about mid-month, maybe a little later this month, we'll begin to announce the ways in which we will host different, you know, kind of rites of passage events, if you will. I was talking with a parent recently about the prom activities and the after prom activities, you know, because all of our schools have not only traditionally had the prom dance, but then have the post-prom activities that go well into the evening. And we've got great groups of parents who are willing and able to do that. You know, certainly the kids like to get dressed up. They like to do the grand march, you know, those sorts of things. And so as it relates to prom, you know, I don't know right now that it would be wise to have 1,000 sweaty kids in a gym doing the traditional non-socially distanced dancing and that sort of thing. And so I know there will be some limitations with that, but there will be some kind of activities, I'm pretty confident after talking with these parents, some kind of activities that will celebrate in that way. I just can't tell you today on March 5th exactly what those will look like. The other end of the year thing that is always talked about is commencement exercises or graduation. And you know, we found a way to do commencement last year. Even in the midst of the most robust time of the pandemic, we'll do something for commencement this year, no doubt about it. You know, as I talk to you right now, I don't know exactly what it'll look like. We do have the Tyson Event Center reserved, as we normally would. We'll probably have to put restrictions and protocol and ticket limits in place for students, but the exact details of that will be announced late this month.
So you're offering a new option for students next year for virtual learning, which the district recently announced that that's going to be now an option. Do you have preliminary numbers on how many have enrolled or have shown interest in staying virtual?
I do, and we're really proud to acknowledge that you know, there's a lot of talk out there about school choice right now, and I certainly understand that. I'm a parent myself, and you know, parents need to have options available, and they can choose what's best for them. We want our public schools to be a menu of the best choices available, and so I'm very proud of the things we've done in our district to try and give more choices to our families, such as our specialty elementary school programs, our STEM-focused, science, technology, engineering, and math-focused middle school programs, our career academy, so that we're not just learning math, reading, science, and social studies in high school, but we're learning those very important programs through the lens of a career pathway is really important. And one of the things we learned through the pandemic, there aren't many blessings about a pandemic, but one of them has been that we've got parents and families out there that prefer the virtual environment. I don't think it works for most, and I'm not sure that I would do it myself, but there are those out there who really believe it's best for them. And so we have decided to have a post-pandemic or an ongoing permanent virtual option for our students. As I talk to you right now, I've got very preliminary numbers because the 1st of March was our deadline. We're in the neighborhood of about the size of a regular elementary school in terms of numbers of students, about 500 students or so, who will, at least at this point, have indicated to us that they have chosen to participate in this virtual option. We've had a number of students who have come into the district through the open enrollment protocol. They're not necessarily living in the district, but they'd like our virtual option, and so they're going to participate. And so we look forward to the teachers that will work in that program and serve those students, and that this will be a choice and an option for our families moving forward.
Enrollment numbers, were they down, average, or what did it look like?
Yeah, so enrollment for school in general. Nationwide went down in the pandemic, and certainly we experienced that as well, although our percentage decrease wasn't as great as some of the other larger schools in the area. We're a district of 15,000 students. We lost 201 in the pandemic. But of course we dug into that data to try and figure out, okay, where are those kids going, where did they go? And most of them were at the youngest grade levels, the preschool, the kindergarten programs, which are not compensatory. They're not necessarily required. And so we do hope, and you know, we always have this saying that hope is not a strategy. We can't just hope for things to go better. But we do hope that a lot of those students will be able to come back to us outside of the pandemic. Certainly in a district this size, you watch your enrollment closely because we're funded on a per pupil basis. And so we do think that those students will come back to us. But like a lot of districts, we suffered a little loss in enrollment during the pandemic.
So students currently enrolled in the virtual program and those possibly for next year, how does that work with meals? Do they have the option to pick up meals, or
They
how does that
do,
work?
actually, and we feel a responsibility to provide them with meal service, even if they're learning virtually. And so our team is putting together the program for next year, the virtual school program for next year, where, and I should be clear that we not only call it the lunch program, we call it the meal program because we serve breakfast every day, we serve lunch every day, and in many locations even serve a late afternoon snack or very light supper. And so we want to be able to provide those virtual students with packets of food that maybe they don't have to come every day, and certainly not more than once a day to our building to receive food services, but maybe they could pick it up on a specific day of the week where they would receive multiple days worth of prepackaged product for them to be able to continue to grow nutritionally as well as they do academically.
So overall, has this academic school year gone how you envisioned? I know that in the beginning there was the fear that, oh my goodness, kids are going to go back to school, there's going to be massive outbreaks. But your district has kind of proven that it was manageable. Overall, how do you?
I would say that when you look at the time period from the start of this school year, so early August, let's say, until today, I think things have gone far better than any of us would have expected. And I think it's because of our staff members and our parents working together. Our virus count and numbers of outbreaks of the virus were far lower than we worried they might be. It includes staff as well as with our students. One of the things we watch closely is student achievement, of course. And you have to think, we lost nearly a third of a school year last year. And so you might assume that our students are going to be about that same third behind in terms of their performance this year. But our earliest, it's still early, but our earliest review of the data shows that we're down about 10% in student learning right now compared to most years before. And we've got to make that 10% up, and we will. We will make that 10% up and exceed it, actually. But I think it's a credit to our staff members. It's a credit to our students and parents that are working hard that as bad as this could have been, we found a way, again, in Sioux City to handle a really large challenge and handle it in a way that didn't set us back years. It just caused us to have to work through that challenging year together. And now with the vaccine coming out and most of our staff members indicating they'll receive the vaccine, we'll keep the protocol in place, cleaning, air handling protocol, the mask wearing for now. We'll keep all that in place and continue to do as much as we can. But I do look forward to the day when the pandemic is a memory.
Anything you would have done differently this academic school year or changed?
Oh, interesting question. When the pandemic started, the news of what was changing was almost every couple of hours. And then as we kind of got into March, and April, then it became every couple of days things seemed to be changing, and then every couple of weeks. And so, during that early time, things were changing so rapidly that we did everything we could to communicate as thoroughly as possible and to get that information out. Now that I see where we are today, I suspect we could always go back and find ways that we could have improved our digital connectivity to one another. Although I do have to say this district is one that seems to celebrate that in-person experience. And I'm thankful for that because I think kids learn best when they're in a classroom with the teacher. And when we were finally able to open our doors and welcome people back, you could sense that relief. And while we could have maybe stretched it further with digital offerings, I'm thankful for the school board, the support of the school board, and the work that they did to help us get back into session.
So at one of the school board meetings, I can't remember which month it was, but it was brought up that a staff member had passed away. I don't think the district ever officially acknowledged, and I'm just trying to understand, before COVID era, if a staff member died, was that addressed with the students, and was that kind of made public that yes, we had a staff member pass away? I guess I'm just trying to understand the difference of of why not. Yes, we've had a staff member that worked for the district, I believe it was
Sure.
22 years.
You know, we've worked through a number of challenges, you know, certainly with the virus, and we, you know, regret the loss of staff member, you know, family members. You know, there have been all kinds of challenges that have gone on. You know, we have 2,500 staff. We have about 25 buildings, a little fewer than 25 buildings, and 15,000 students. And not everybody has the same level of contact with everybody else. And so there have been times in our history where a very widely known and incredibly well-loved, you know, I'm thinking of a recent administrator passing, where we've actually opened the school building for the memorial. Now, this would have been before the pandemic, of course. I can think of other times where we have family members out there that don't want the attention and the communication. We as a school district would never take the place of an agency in town that might do a first notification of an illness or a death, like say the hospital, the police department, the family themselves. And so, you know, I can't speak to that specific case that you asked about, but you know, certainly we do all that we can to be supportive not only of the family that's going through a challenge or loses a loved one, but it's really important to us to take care of the students surrounding that person as well, whether that be counseling services, mental health services, those sorts of things. And so that's a kind of standard model of practice for us, acknowledging that the initial communication surrounding the death or the challenge often doesn't and shouldn't come from us.
Well, so any closing remarks or maybe any advice for other districts that are taking the next step of finally going to in-person learning?
You know, one of the greatest things that's come out of this very challenging time has been the way in which some of us who have very similar responsibilities, positions, jobs, have slowed down at certain times enough to connect with one another. The professional groups of whether it be superintendents or transportation directors or human resources leaders or those sorts of things, I think are stronger now than they've ever been because we've begun to digitally connect on a more regular basis. And you know, it's been interesting to watch how every community has their own perspective, and they're just sure that this is the right thing for their community, but that other community not very far away would do things very differently for their own reasons. And I think it's caused us to become a tighter working unit. You know, we don't agree with each other all the time, and certainly people in Sioux City are passionate about students and their schools, and you know, you only need to look at one of those days where you know, inclement weather is coming to see everybody's got their own little perspective on exactly how things should be handled. But I think we're stronger today than we were before the pandemic as a result of just having to work through this together. And I look forward to using that strength. You know, we've got federal resources that have come our way, and dedicated board, dedicated staff and community. We are going to come out of this pandemic better than we went in. I'm just confident of that. And I don't know exactly what it'll look like, and it'll get challenging from time to time, but we'll get there. And I'm really thankful to be in Siouxland where people work together in this fashion, even passionately, to serve each other in better ways.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Gausman, for your time today.
Absolutely.